Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Professor Joseph Prabhu, Dr. Jasbir Chalwa, Sri Mohit Gupta, Sri Chandi Prasad Bhatt, Ms. Shristi Harinarayan, Mr. Piyush Khandewal, distinguished online guests, on behalf of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, it gives me great pleasure to invite you to the fourth program of the series of online discussions on Gandhian perspective and the five facets of Indian culture. The topic for today being dialogue. Mahatma Gandhiji was deeply interested in the comparative study of cultures and religions since the days of his youth. The major portion of Gandhiji's life was spent in dialogue between East and West. But his dialogue was not merely with words or ideas or theory. He lived a dialogue springing from his love for truth, satya, and non-violence, ahimsa. He once said, "In order to transform others, you have to first transform yourself." The heart of Gandhiji's message is to first look within oneself, change oneself, and when the world sees a different you, then it automatically changes itself. To begin with today's program, I would like to invite our first guest speaker, Sri Mohit Gupta, founder and chief creator, City Book Leaders India, for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for getting us all here. It takes a lot of commendable effort to bring people from different lives and lifestyles, to bring them together and to talk about someone who must be, who is now 150-year-old plus. And that ideology, I'm sure, is before he was born was 5,000 years and more, and till the time this humanity will survive, it will remain. That's Gandhian philosophy. And I think Gandhian philosophy in the entire timeline of I thought Gandhian ideology is part of the overall ideology that we had in our Indian system. I see the network has gone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. You can speak, but your picture is not coming. Okay, now fine.
Okay. What I was saying is, while we compare India, and many a times we feel good and privileged to be an Indian or to be a Bharatiya, it's very important to know that how and what. And I must say that thinking is a combination of all the great scriptures that we had in India as Vedas. So I have been asked, and I will keep my promise to keep it under 10 minutes only, because I think that's what the Gandhian ideology was, to respect not only yours time but others' time as well. And we are talking about the dialogue. The most important element of any dialogue is the time-bound dialogue. A dialogue just cannot go, because you need to give others that respect, that empathy, that chance to represent their thoughts as well. So on that note, I will try to connect the next 6-7 minutes with what actually built the Gandhi of the proper dialogue, on what actually inspired him with the human values of from the land of India. So to all the people who would listen in Durban, I think there's a beautiful connect in as well, that how the world explored India through South Africa and through that part of the world from where the ship coming to India. And then everything is a history now, and whatever Gandhiji did for this country has a long to it. But since I'll only talk about those five important aspects of dialogue and what is a good dialogue, I think that the communication between two people, and if it could be as amicably as possible. And he also said once that one form of violence is also when we raise our voice, when we abuse someone, when we don't respect other, even in our speech. So I think that part of dialogue has to be always understood, and what it implies to us as human beings. I'll talk of five such elements. because we all are made of five elements, and our hand also represents the Panch. So I'll talk about the first aspect of the dialogue, which comes from our Vedic sciences, and the first mantra that comes, Vasudev Kutumbakam, that the whole world is a family, and that's where the harmony, the empathy comes in our dialogue. Start thinking that there is no discrimination amongst us. We are all part of one ecosystem, which is, and everything is Bhu Mata, which is the Mother Earth. Everything will settle, and the best dialogues can only happen when we come onto the same plane of equality. The second one is to listen, which is Shruti. And if you all recall, the Vedic science, the Vedic way of reaching out to others, then passing the knowledge was always through Shruti. We used to listen, which was Shruti means to listen by ear. And that's what is very important in a dialogue. If you example of when Veer Savarkar and Gandhiji spoke about their differences, or when Subhash Chandra Netaji, when they spoke about their differences, the dialogue was very, very amicable. It was absolutely, even if we agree, but we don't disagree with each other as human beings. Our thought has to be similar. Our reaching to that place can be different, but that harmony is always balanced, and that listening is very important. The third one is seva, which is the service. And throughout the Gandhian ideology has always been to serve with others. That's exactly what dialogue is also all about. If in our dialogue we are not able to provide that service to others, what am I doing? Fourth one is ahimsa. And as I've already mentioned, that even by speech, ahimsa happens. And the most pertinent form, the cruelest form of ahimsa is by speech. When we abuse someone, when our thoughts reach someone else and they hit them not only for that moment, but for lifetime. And if you see, most of the domestic violence actually happens when my spouse is usually because of this form of violence, which is the form of violence, which should be avoided. And the fourth one, and the fifth one, which is about being always in composition, always in a life of fulfillment, which actually helps not only you but the entire nature. Acting is having a composed life. You don't need to buy very costly watches, or you should not just be too mechanized to a huge industrialization, which Gandhiji never approved of. And that was the reason why, in fact, he wanted the charkha to be as part of the symbol, other than the Ashok Chakra on our flag, which many a times we just missed out on that message from him. And that part, as the fifth part, is called Bodhi Chit, which is the joy that we enjoy in most harmonious way in the limited scope of resources that we have. We share with each other by simple means of dialogue. So that's what from my side is, ladies and gentlemen. If we apply these Panchbhut, the dialogue that Gandhiji's life that we can learn from, it would definitely take us to, I should say, Bodhichat, and we can enjoy all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sri Mohit Gupta, for sharing your immense knowledge with us and taking time off your busy schedule. Now I would like to invite our next guest speaker, Dr. Jasbir Chalwa, scholar on Buddhist and Gandhian philosophy, Chandigarh, India, for his remarks.
Jai Hind, Namaskar. It is often repeated that South Africa transformed Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi into Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, in turn, transformed South Africa into a land of satyagrah and ahimsa, which mean truthfulness and non-violence. The two key words which transformed many into Martin Luther King's and Nelson Mandela's, and till today have the power of transforming cruel and warring peoples of the world into kind, selfless, saintly souls. full of love. We Indians always believed and therefore bow our heads in respect for the people of South Africa who gave us Gandhi not only as a great soul, which is the meaning of Mahatma, but as a political scientist, a great visionary and leader and thinker who transformed slave India into a Mukt Bharat. Let me take this opportunity of sending best wishes full of love to brothers and sisters of South Africa in particular, and all netizens of the world, all net sisters and net brothers commemorating Bapu's 150th birth anniversary. And my salutations for the city of Durban, which transformed a Kuli Gandhi into a Savior Gandhi. It was the land of Transvaal which gave a space for the laboratory of experimentalist Gandhi to try his hypothesis: hatred can be converted into love if it is reacted upon by tolerance and compassion. One may argue that it is nothing new, not a new idea at all. In India, it had been proved by several saints like Buddha, Nanak, and many others. There are many of their life experiences of transforming the most cruel and hardcore terrorists into great poets like Valmiki, Angulimals, and many Arihants. But let me tell you that Indians give full credits for such transformations to the spiritual powers of Buddha and Nanak and other saints. And Gandhi was just a young barrister having a only degree of bar at law, like thousands of others educated in the British cultural system. He was not a spiritual guru with charismatic powers when he landed in South Africa. What else? Like many other slave Indians, he reached there to earn his livelihood. Yes, one thing was that he landed with his cultural background, his pagadi on his head or the turban on his head, signifying his religious upbringing in a Vaishnav family, which was the source of latent energy in him. The blessings of his parents, mother and father, inculcated tolerance, truthfulness, honesty, fear in doing something wrong or committing some sin, doing some harm to others. So these qualities in the formative stage of a child's psyche were deep-seated in young barrister's mind, which made him successful in bringing peace in the family of Dada Abdullah, a Gujarati Mohammedan merchant who had hired this young man, fresh England returned, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, to fight for his legal rights in South Africa. He was a novice. It was in May 1893. In May 1893, he was only 24 years old. A young man, a coolie barrister from Gujarat who landed at Durban port. And the first encounter with a magistrate in Durban court was the first bitter pill, I should say like that, a bitter pill of insult when he was asked to remove his turban. And Gandhiji could not swallow. Mohandas could not swallow it and walked out of the court in protest because it was an insult of the Indian culture. As an educated British citizen, he took the help of newspapers and newspaper media, print media, to present his democratic right of respectfully protesting. So, the city Durban sowed the first seed, the thought provoker, to say in the Indian community of bonded labor, which was mostly in South Africa. And after that, the famous episode of Martinsburg station, when a passenger holding a legitimate ticket of first class is thrown out by a fellow passenger from the coach because he is an arrogant white and just because Gandhi is a black or a coolie. Now, Mohandas realized in this trip from Durban to Pretoria what is the condition of migrant Indians and the native blacks in the British colonies. But in spite of all these humiliations, Gandhiji was not in favor of negative generalization because of the deep-seated Indian cultural values which talk of Nar Narayan, which advocate the unity of mankind, which praises Atman, the presence of Paramatma in every Atma. And the bhajan, which was recited in his family, Vaishnav Jan to tene kahiye, je peer parai jane hai. Now this enlightened him to understand the problems of white men also, forgive them and treat with compassion. This belief system of Indian culture encouraged him to analyze threadbare the situations extant in South Africa and then find out the root cause like a scientist. Gandhi never relied in the hearsays. Same thing like Buddha. He wanted to verify them, verify every case before believing. And it was this approach of seeking truth that he could bring the two conflicting Muslims, Dada Abdullah and Tayyib Memon, to a compromising settlement in the name of Islam, and thus saved both from spoiling their money on white lawyers. It was this spirit which was lacking in Indians and divided them into different communities. They were compelled to face the insults and injustices of the whites. Staying divided, they become weaker and were drifted away from the truth of Indian culture. Lot of things can be said remembering those days in South Africa, but two most important points which should be noted are Gandhiji agreed to remove his turban and accept the norms of Natal Supreme Court to carry on his practice in South Africa. Why? Because his objectives were higher. It was just not the representation, but it was for a higher cause. He had the mission of uprooting apartheid, the hatred towards Indians and natives, and establish the bond of love between them. He knew that it is a wrong struggle, but it is sure to be successful because every living soul is run by love, and even criminals can be converted into gentlemen. His convictions and truthful behavior could win him the favors of many whites. We have seen it. The case of Balasundram, for example, a Tamil bonded slave of a cruel white, was accepted by another white when Gandhiji interfered. No Indian since then had to remove his turban like Balasundram had to do before the white. Secondly, when again in Durban, when Gandhiji returned from India in December 1896, due to rumors against him, young boys, white young boys, attacked Gandhi and he became senseless. He was protected by the wife of police superintendent of Durban, a white lady. The mob of whites ransacked the house of Rustamji where Gandhiji was staying. The British minister Chamberlain offered to punish those hooligans who had manhandled Gandhiji, but Gandhiji said no. Gandhiji tolerated it. Their misbehavior was forgiven by them, saying they are the misled youth, they do not know the truth. Gandhiji declined to sue them in court and thus won their hearts. Thus, Durban prepared Gandhiji's mettle to experiment with satyagraha and non-violence, that is ahimsa. He believed that the conditions of Indians in Transvaal can be improved only by winning the hearts of whites, by removing their misunderstandings and jealousy. In the year 1899, during the war between English and Boers, Gandhiji served them with medical aid. 1100 Indian volunteers joined him and they gave selfless service 24/7 without any discrimination. And later also in the coming years, Indians treated the native Zulus also. Now, this social service was thankfully acknowledged by the English government. And thus, gradually, Gandhiji made a space in the hearts of every Britisher, and which later on proved a big help in the freedom struggle also in India. These experiences and outcomes of his political experiments in South Africa were the milestones for him in his political career. And in fact, in Durban's Gandhi, one can see the devotion of a scientist for his experiments. It is a long story of his march, which started in Durban and cannot be completed in few minutes. But on this occasion, one can say that Gandhi, as a young man, was doing tapasya. Tapasya in South Africa with two mantras, satyagraha and ahimsa. And he got to see this in India when he involved every Indian to fight for independence in the real sense. That is independence, not only political, but also social, economic, and cultural freedom. With these words, I pay my deep-seated reverence for our Bapu and wish you again many happy remembrances of the great visionary leader. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jasbir Chalwa. Now I would like to invite our next guest speaker, Professor Joseph Prabhu, Professor of Philosophy from California State University, Los Angeles, for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for that kind introduction, and thank you to the Durban community for this very warm invitation. It's a great privilege to talk again about Gandhiji, about whom I have written and spoken now for close to 35 years. My task today is to talk about Gandhi's emphasis on dialogue. And I will say first something philosophically, because I am a philosopher, about how important dialogue is and what dialogue presupposes, and how Gandhiji fulfilled that particular ideal of dialogue in a general sense, and then also his specific dialogues with people and between cultures and between religions. So dialogue, even though the word is used very commonly, at least from a philosophical perspective, carries a very important meaning. If you go back to the Greek, the word comes from two Greek words, logos, which means knowledge, wisdom, and dia, which means across. So if you put the two together, one is sharing one's knowledge, and in Gandhiji's life, more than knowledge, his very life, his very being, and doing that in conversation and in dialogue with someone else. So at least two or three things follow from this definition. One is that one engages in a dialogue with someone else and not just with oneself when you hope and want to listen carefully to someone else and to learn from that other person. If you just talk about yourself, then there is no dialogue. All right. A dialogue is a communicative act and an act of humility where you are willing and keen to listen to someone and to learn from him or her. That's the first point. Second point is that obviously, when one listens to someone, one may or may not necessarily agree with them. Sometimes if one is talking with a friend, agreement may be possible, and then you take that agreement deeper. But sometimes when you're talking with someone who is your adversary or you're someone in opposition, then of course you can't expect to necessarily agree with that person. And so we use the expression, we agree to disagree, all right? And agreeing to disagree is already an act of great kindness and tolerance, which again, Gandhi depicted. And the third point that I would want to make about dialogue is that the purpose of dialogue, which is that when one listens to someone else and hopes to learn from them, then if you listen deeply to someone else, then you get transformed, even in a small way, all right? And so that willingness to move out of your comfort zone and be transformed, which takes a lot of courage and humility, is something, again, that Gandhi, through his various dialogues, depicted. So if we just keep those 3 points in mind, that one is communicating with someone else, one is hoping to learn from that person, even if one disagrees with that person, and finally, through that deep listening, to get transformed, then we have a very rich model of dialogue, which I think Gandhi exemplified. Even with people with whom he strongly disagreed, like Muhammad Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan, uh, with whom he had many clashes, Gandhi was always respectful, to the point of being very unpopular with Sardar Patel and with Jawaharlal Nehru, his colleagues, and then the first leaders of independent India, in saying that he, Gandhi, in order to accommodate Jinnah, was willing to grant him the prime ministership of a united India, because he didn't want India to be divided. Of course, Nehru and Sardar Patel could not go along with that. And we know that history went in a different direction. But it shows to what extent Gandhi was willing to accommodate someone with whom he strongly disagreed. All right, and so agreeing to disagree is quite a challenging act. And in Gandhi's case, as I say, he was willing to make a great concession, a great accommodation to Jinnah, in order to preserve some semblance of friendship and respect for Jinnah. So that goes to show how far Gandhi took this ideal, which many people, if we think about it carefully, are either not able or not willing to do. It takes a man and a person of deep wisdom and compassion to be able to do that. So I will exemplify that in the time that I have left with two conversations, one of which I've already spoken about, namely the conversation with Jinnah, but I will draw some lessons from it. And the second is something that is, of course, very dear to my heart, the conversation and the dialogue between religions and cultures. So, in one sense, I'll be talking about personal conversation with the example of Jinnah. And the second case, I will talk about intercultural dialogue and interreligious dialogue. So, in the case of personal conversation, when one is talking one-to-one with a person and sees his or her face, and of course the dynamics are different because the person is right in front of you, or at least within easy reach. Dialogue involves more than just what one says. It involves one's body language, it involves one's way of relating to that person. And as I've said already, Gandhi was, not only through his words, but through his actions, willing to accommodate someone with whom he strongly disagreed in order to promote the greater good. So the level of self-sacrifice that Gandhi was willing to show in this one instance is one example of his many conversations. Of course, another conversation is someone with his great friend, Charlie Andrews, who was depicted in the film by Richard Attenborough, and who was a Christian minister. And again, their conversation and their dialogue was very frank. Gandhi respected C.F. Andrews' Christianity, but C.F. Andrews was sufficiently respectful of Gandhiji not to want to change him and say, and so in a sense, that's a very good example of dialogue in friendship, where you have two people with very strong convictions, in one case Christian, in the other case Hindu, who had a very deep and fruitful exchange, which transformed both of them. C.F. Andrews, to his dying day, thought of Bapu as his spiritual father, and likewise, Gandhiji, when C.F. Andrews passed away, was very sad, and expressed on more than one occasion how much he had learned from C.F. Andrews and how much he had been transformed through the conversation and dialogue with C.F. Andrews. So that's the example at a personal level. I want now, in the last few minutes that I have, to talk about the dialogue that I have been involved in, using Gandhi's methods and approach, and this is something that Ila Gandhi, who is also involved with the Parliament of Religions, is also involved in, as indeed many other people in South Africa. In fact, the second modern Congress of the Parliament of the World's Religions met in Cape Town in 1999, and Nelson Mandela gave the keynote address to that Congress in Cape Town. And of course, as we know, Mandela was a great admirer of Gandhiji. And so I'll use that as a short example of the dialogue between cultures. And because my time is short, I want to cite a particular saying that comes from the Parliament, which has great importance in today's world. And that saying from the Parliament is in 3 lines, or if you, in Indian terms, 3 shlokas. All right. First, there will be no peace in the world unless there is peace among religions. We know this to be true because, unfortunately, religious strife between Hindus and Muslims, between Jews and Palestinians, and so on, is still a feature of our world, sadly. But point number 1 is that there will be no peace in the world unless there's peace among religions. There will be no peace among religions unless there is dialogue among religions. And again, this is pretty self-evident that if we want to promote peace between religions, then we have to engage in dialogue, listen to each other respectfully and tolerantly, and possibly get improved in that dialogue. And the final saying is that there will be no dialogue among religions unless we look for commonalities among, and differences, and fruitful differences, which we can respect among religions. So, in a sense, Gandhi is a great model for interreligious and intercultural dialogue. I will not deal now with culture so much because that's a broader topic. But among religions, as we know in Gandhi's prayers, one had prayers from every tradition, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Zoroastrian, Jain, Sikh, and in a sense, for Gandhi, this prayerful dialogue in this particular instance was an extremely important feature, both of his personal life and also of his conversation with people from other faiths. So, as I said, the Parliament of Religions while it has not specifically invoked Gandhi, has been deeply influenced by Gandhi. And as a trustee, I am one among quite a few in the parliament. Ila Gandhi is another one who has tried to promote these interreligious dialogues. Finally, I want to say something as I've been given 5 minutes more as an Indian about the situation in India. And here I have to be frank because for complex reasons, present day India, contemporary India, and again, I have to be honest here because I would not be Gandhian if I were not honest, has not maintained the ideals of Gandhi in this respect, as we see already in the great religious strife that exists in India today, which is very unfortunate. And many of us who work in the Indian context, and even though I'm based in Los Angeles, I have many, many Indian contacts, both in Gandhi's ashram in Wardha and in many Gandhian societies. All this ashram in Sevagram and in these Gandhi centers around the world are pushing Gandhian ideals because the present world, which we have to face, is one that has, for complex reasons that would be a topic of another lecture, has deviated from Gandhi. And the price that both India and the world pays is quite obvious. I'll make just 2 points in conclusion. One was that from South Africa and from other parts of the world, there has been some criticism recently. I mean, Gandhi statues are being pulled down and so on because of the accusation that he was a racist in South Africa. This is a complex topic which I cannot go into in any great detail, but I will just say 2 things. One is that Nelson Mandela, who together with Desmond Tutu and many others in South Africa fought against apartheid, revered Gandhi and studied Gandhi. And the Peace and Reconciliation Commission that came in South Africa after the apartheid regime was pushed aside, that Peace and Reconciliation Commission drew heavily on Gandhi. And the whole new concept of restorative justice, not just retributive justice, which is punishing someone, but learning how to dialogue with people who have suffered great harm and injury, as happened to the blacks in and the marginalized people in South Africa, but so that their anger would be both listened to and properly resolved. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is one of the remarkable aspects of peace in our time and a culture of peace, and it owes a great deal to Gandhi. The second point about considering Gandhi as a racist is not only that people like Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, who respected him, the civil rights movement, which was led by blacks in the United States, Martin Luther King, Reverend James Lawson, and many others, again, as we well know, this is a well-known fact, revered Gandhi and never considered him a racist. And Gandhi himself said, when people like Howard Thurman, who was Martin Luther King's teacher, met Gandhiji in India in the 1930s, Gandhi himself said that the fullest expression of satyagraha and his ideas would come among African Americans and blacks. And so while Gandhi hoped and prayed that his ideals would be respected in his native India, he was realistic enough to know that his ideas were unpopular and that blacks in America and in Africa would take up his ideas and bring them to fruition. And of course, we know that that is true, both in the case of the United States and in the case of South Africa. So we're talking about a person who, at the time of his 150th birth anniversary, and now, which is now past, whose ideas are still very relevant. And so this is not just a historical exercise. This is an exercise which I, as a philosopher who deals with the present world, both in India and in other parts, looks to see what we can learn. And my forthcoming book is called Liberating Gandhi, What is Living and What is Dead about Gandhiji. And a lot of Gandhiji is still alive, relevant, and crucially important. Thank you very much for your time and invitation.
Thank you very much, Professor Joseph Prabhu. Now I would like to invite our next guest speaker, Shri Chandi Prasad Bhatt, Sarvadoya Kendra, Chamoli, Uttarakhand, India, for his remarks.
भारतीय दूतावास दक्षिण अफ्रीका के डरबन में स्थित विवेकानंद सांस्कृतिक केंद्र के निदेशक डॉक्टर चैतन्य प्रकाश योगी जी, मोहित गुप्ता जी, सुश्री बनवारी लाल जी, सुश्री सृष्टि हरित नारायण जी, इस ऑनलाइन समारोह में उपस्थित बहनों और भाइयों, दक्षिण अफ्रीका की कठिन परीक्षाओं से एक सत्याग्रही के रूप में प्रकट गांधी जी सन 1915 में शानदार कामयाबी को हासिल करके भारत लौटे थे। आज ऑनलाइन के इस संवाद कार्यक्रम के जरिए बातचीत करने का मुझे भी अवसर मिला। इसके लिए मैं डरबन स्थित भारतीय दूतावास के विवेकानंद सांस्कृतिक केंद्र के और मुख्य रूप से डॉक्टर योगी जी का हृदय से आभारी हूं और कृतज्ञता ज्ञापित करता हूं। विवेकानंद केंद्र की ओर से गांधी जी के 150वीं जयंती के समापन वर्ष के अवसर के आसपास गांधी जी के परिप्रेक्ष्य में भारतीय संस्कृति के 5 सूक्ष्म विषयों को लेकर के ऑनलाइन विचारों को व्यक्त करने की श्रृंखला आयोजित की गई है। यह प्रशंसनीय है। आज यह बातचीत की चौथी कड़ी है जिसमें गांधी जी के विचार और संवाद को लेकर विचार और अनुभवों का आदान प्रदान हो रहा है। इस कार्यक्रम में उससे पूर्व विद्वान वक्ता मोहित गुप्ता ने बहुत ही बेहतरीन ढंग से अपने विचार और अनुभवों का साझा किया। इसके लिए मैं आप सभी को उनको साधुवाद देता हूं। मैं विनम्रतापूर्वक स्पष्ट करना चाहता हूं कि मैं एकेडमिशियन एवं विषय विशेषज्ञ नहीं हूं। मैं तो सामाजिक हित चिंतन के लिए ग्रामीण परिवेश में ग्रामीणों से बचाने वाला, उनके अनुभव से सीखने वाला व्यक्ति हूं। आज से 7 दशक पहले जयप्रकाश नारायण जी हिमालय में बद्रीनाथ जी की यात्रा पर हमारे क्षेत्र में आए थे। उनके संपर्क में आने से गांधी जी के विचार और उनके कार्यों को लेकर के हमारी समझ बढ़ी, जिससे हिमालय में स्थित उत्तराखंड के सुदूरवर्ती क्षेत्र में इन विचारों की प्रेरणा से रचनात्मक कार्यों की ओर रुझान बढ़ा और लोक संगठनों के द्वारा हमने इन विचारों के आधार पर गांधी के ग्राम स्वराज्य की परिकल्पना के साकार के लिए पहल शुरू की। मैं इसी विषय पर आपको अपने अनुभवों के आधार पर बातचीत करना चाहता हूं कि आज सवाल यह है कि गांधी के विचार को कई लोग कहते हैं कि ये हवाई विचार है। गांधी जब 1915 में दक्षिण अफ्रीका से भारत लौटे और फिर 1917 में चंपारण गए, तो वहां पर उनको वो सबसे हट करके जो अंतिम आदमी है, एक नया दर्शन उनको मिला। समाज का जो अंतिम आदमी है, वो एक लंबी कहानी है कि एक महिला मिली, उसकी धोती वो बहुत गंदी थी, ये एक लंबा प्रश्न है। लेकिन उस सबसे गांधी को भारत का पूरा चित्र दर्शन मिला। और ये न केवल भारत के लिए बल्कि हमारे जो गरीब देश हैं, विकासमान देश हैं, वहाँ भी कई इलाके ऐसे हैं कि इस प्रकार की स्थिति है। और मैं एक बार जब अमेरिका में गया तो वहाँ पर एक संगोष्ठी में वहाँ एक गोरी महिला ने एंड्रू जंग जो वहाँ अपने भाषण दे रहे थे, उन्होंने कहा आप काले लोगों के बारे में तो कह रहे हैं, लेकिन हमारे बारे में क्या, हम महिलाओं पर किस प्रकार। तो ये एक तरफ से गांधी का जो वो था चंपारण सत्याग्रह, केवल वो नीलाहों के साथ का जो आंदोलन था वही नहीं था, बल्कि जो समाज का, माने वो केवल भारत ही नहीं बल्कि दुनिया में आगे चल करके जो आखिरी आदमी है उसके बारे में उनको एक तरफ से नया दर्शन शुरू हुआ। तो हमने जो कुछ भी, जैसे मैंने बताया कि जयप्रकाश जी बद्रीनाथ आए, उनसे हमने गांधी के विचारों को सुना, उसको ज़्यादा समझने का प्रयास किया। और उसी में जो ये अनटू द लास्ट, अंत वाले को भी जब हमने कहानी आचार्य दादा धर्माधिकारी से सुना, जो सर्वोदय के मीमांसक थे, तो हमने उसका प्रयोग स्वयं अपने जीवन में क्या गांधी विचार जिसको लोग कहते हैं कि, तो उसी दौरान हमने आज से 60वें दशक में स्थानीय लोगों को संगठित करते हुए साम्य योगी परिवार सहकारिता के आधार पर बनाई और कई सफल कार्यक्रम इसके माध्यम से संचालित किए, जिसमें क्षमता के आधार पर काम, बराबरी के आधार पर दाम, कई सफल कार्यक्रम इसके द्वारा संचालित किए गए। इसके बाद गांधी जी के ग्राम स्वराज्य के विचार को धरातल पर उतारने के लिए दसोरी ग्राम स्वराज्य मंडल का गठन किया, जिसके माध्यम से ग्राम स्वराज्य, ग्रामोद्योग, मद्य निषेध और वन संरक्षण जैसे अभियान संचालित किए गए, जो न केवल भारत के लिए बल्कि हमारे जो गरीब देश हैं, मुख्य रूप से दक्षिण एशिया के देशों में इनके आज सबसे ज्यादा आवश्यकता है, जिसमें परस्पर संवाद को प्रमुखता से प्राथमिकता दी गई, जो सफल भी रहा। सत्य, संवेदनशीलता, सृजनशीलता, संवाद और सेवा, इन 5 सूत्रों को लेकर के जो स्वामी विवेकानंद के अंदर ने गांधी जी के परिप्रेक्ष्य में जो यह संवाद श्रृंखला शुरू की है, लगभग हर तथ्य को इन 6 दशकों में हमने अनुभव किए। भारत की आजादी के लिए गांधी जी ने अहिंसक सत्याग्रह का जो बीज मंत्र दिया था, उसमें हमारी संस्कृति के ये सभी सूत्र किसी न किसी रूप में समाहित रहे हैं। हम लोग सामाजिक जीवन में आने के बाद अक्सर गांधी जी द्वारा प्रतिपादित गांधी जी के 9 सिद्धांतों को आत्मसात करने का आग्रह हमारे उसमें रहता था। अहिंसा, सत्य, ब्रह्मचर्य, संग्रह, शरीर श्रम, स्वाद, सर्वत्र भयवर्धन। तो इस प्रकार से एक रचनात्मक कार्य के लिए इन सिद्धांतों का पालन करने की कोशिश करते हुए ही समाज रचना के कार्य को आगे बढ़ाने का रास्ता मिल सकता है। और कठिन से कठिन परिस्थितियों में भी गांधी जी के ये सूत्र लक्ष्य तक पहुंचाने के लिए माध्यम बनते हैं। हम यहाँ पर गांधी जी के परिप्रेक्ष्य में भारतीय संस्कृति में संवाद पर बातचीत कर रहे हैं। गांधी जी अक्सर कहा करते थे कि बुराई से घृणा करो, बुरे से नहीं। इसके पीछे प्रेम का भाव छिपा था और समाज में फैली कुरीतियां, कुप्रथाओं और गड़बड़ियों की सफाई का भाव छिपा था। इसमें व्यक्ति और कर्म के भेद का भाव से सुधार की संभावना और रास्ते खुले थे। इस विचार को जीवन में अपनाने से सुधार के लिए संवाद हेतु हर जगह संभावना बनी रहती है। गांधी जी एक तरफ से युग दृष्टा थे। उनके चिंतन और व्यवहार परिस्थिति एवं पर्यावरण के प्रति बहुत स्पष्ट थे। दशकों पहले उन्होंने कहा था कि धरती सबकी जरूरत की को पूरा कर सकती है, लेकिन किसी के लालच और विलासिता को नहीं, भोग और विलासिता को नहीं। ये केवल एक देश के लिए या एक इलाके के लिए नहीं, बल्कि पूरी दुनिया के लिए। गांधी जी इस विचार और चेतावनी के बावजूद हम सबको जन्म देने वाली, हमारा पालन करने वाली इस धरती पर हमने अपने लालच को बढ़ाकर गंभीर संकट पैदा कर दिया है। यह संकट लगातार घनीभूत होता जा रहा है। यह स्थिति इस दुनिया को कहाँ ले जाने वाली है, यह भी बहुत सोचनीय है। अपनी आवश्यकताओं को सीमित कर हम इस दुनिया को बनाए रख सकते हैं। जीने का सर्वश्रेष्ठ सिद्धांत यही है कि हम अपनी आवश्यकताओं को सीमित रखते हुए केवल उतना ही उपयोग करें जितने से हमारा जीवन और कार्य क्षमता बनी रह सके। आज दुनिया के सारे देश इस पर जो है कि दुनिया में जो ये गड़बड़ी हो रही है पर्यावरण संतुलन की, कैसे क्या, इसमें गांधी ने जो दशकों पहले जो बात वो कर दी थी, तो मैं समझता हूँ कि वो तो एक सबसे युग दृष्टा थे। हम लोगों ने गांधी के विचार को उत्तराखंड के सीमांत क्षेत्र में पिछले 6 दशकों से गांधी जी के इस सीख को आगे बढ़ाने में काम में लगे हुए हैं। आम आदमी के गरिमापूर्ण जीवन एवं प्रकृति के एवं उसके स्वास्थ्य तथा जटिल अंतर संबंधों को समझने और समझाने में लगे हैं। संवाद में 70 और 80 के दशक में वहां घटित प्राकृतिक आपदाएं तथा उनके कारणों को समझने के साथ साथ हमने कुछ रचना एवं सुधार के कार्य प्रारंभ किए। सरकारी नीतियों के अहिंसक किंतु प्रभावी प्रतिकार, जिसके कारण चिपको आंदोलन का जन्म हुआ। यह आंदोलन साधारण पर्वतीय ग्रामीणों के आग्रह को आप जैसे विद्वानों तथा दुनिया के विचारकों एवं पर्यावरणवादियों ने स्वीकार किया और यह पूरे देश व दुनिया में फैला। इसके साथ ही चिपको आंदोलन की जो मातृ संस्था है जसोली ग्राम स्वराज मंडल, पर्यावरण संवर्धन एवं संरक्षण शिविरों की एक सतत चलने वाली श्रृंखला का संचालन कर रही है। क्योंकि आज जो भी है कार्यक्रम होते हैं, गांधी ने 2 बातें की थी, संघर्ष और रचना, तो यही उनके विचारों के अनुरूप हम आज उत्तराखंड में इन कार्यों को कर रहे हैं, जिनमें आम ग्रामीण जन, मुख्यतः महिलाएं, युवा के साथ वानिकी, पर्यावरण, सामाजिक एवं आर्थिक विकास से मुद्दों पर चर्चा होती है। विषय विशेषज्ञ वैज्ञानिक भाग लेते हैं। वृक्षारोपण, एक और तो पेड़ बचाने का, दूसरी ओर पेड़ लगाने का, उनको बढ़ाने का, उनको संरक्षित करने जैसे कार्यक्रमों को जन आंदोलन के रूप में संचालित किया जा रहा है। इन शिविरों में विकास की अवधारणा और विनाश सहित विकास के विभिन्न पक्षों, सिद्धांतों, लोकानुभवों तथा कार्यक्रमों पर विचार विमर्श होता है, जिससे पंचायती संस्थाओं के प्रतिनिधि, अधिकारी, कार्यकर्ता, छात्र, शिक्षक इत्यादि भाग लेते हैं। हिमालय में वनों को बचाने के लिए 7वें दशक में जो गांधीवादी अहिंसक आंदोलन चला, जिसमें कई प्रकार के तो सारे राजनीतिक पक्षों के लोग थे, लेकिन हम लोग जो थे गांधी के विचार को गांव-गांव में फैलाया था। इसलिए जब पेड़ काटने वाले आए तो सामान्य गांव के लोगों ने सीधे और सरल भाषा में कहा पेड़ क्यों नहीं कटना चाहिए, और इसके लिए कहा कि पेड़ों को बचाने के लिए, क्योंकि गांधी विचार से जुड़े हुए थे कि तुम्हारी कुल्हाड़ी पर ताकत है, पहले हमारी पीठ पर मारो। तो इस प्रकार से एक सौम्यतम माने सौम्यतर से सौम्यतम अहिंसक आंदोलन गांधी विचार के आधार पर वहां पर चला, जिसमें सत्य, अहिंसा, संवेदना माने उन गांव वालों के जिन के आसपास के जंगल कटने से उन पर क्या दुष्प्रभाव पड़ता है, इस प्रकार की संवेदना, सृजनशीलता, संवाद और सेवा के जिन सूत्रों की यहाँ पर हम बात कर रहे हैं उन्हें धरातल पर प्रयोग करते हुए वहां पर देखा और देखा जा सकता है। महात्मा गांधी जी ने सत्याग्रह के बारे में बताया था कि सत्याग्रह अपना बलिदान देने का भाव निहित है। हिंद स्वराज्य पुस्तक में गांधी जी सत्याग्रह को स्पष्ट करते हुए लिखते हैं कि जब लोग अपने अधिकार पाने के लिए सुख दुख सहन करते हैं, उनके दुख सहन करने के ढंग को हम सत्याग्रह कहते हैं। सत्याग्रह का जो ध्येय है सीधी लड़ाई के ठीक उलट है। वे और स्पष्ट करते हुए कहते हैं कि मुझे यदि कोई काम पसंद नहीं आता है और वह काम मैं नहीं करता हूँ तो उसमें मैं सत्याग्रह या आत्मबल का उपयोग करता हूँ। वे उदाहरण देते हुए लिखते हैं कि जब कोई कानून मुझे पसंद नहीं आता, अगर मैं इसके विरोध में सरकार पर हमला करता हूं तो कहा जाएगा कि मैंने शारीरिक बल का प्रयोग किया, लेकिन मैं यदि इस कानून को ही स्वीकार न करूं, इस कारण होने वाली सजा भुगत लूं, तो कहा जाएगा कि मैंने आत्मबल या सत्याग्रह से काम किया है। गांधी जी के विचार हमें इन 6 दशकों में कई बार जमीन पर उतारने पड़े, न केवल वनों को पर्यावरण से संबंधित बल्कि लोगों की जो दैनिक आवश्यकताओं के लिए भी वो करना पड़ा, और अंत में हमें पूर्ण सफलता भी मिली। चिपको आंदोलन के शुरुआती दौर में गांधी जी के इन विचारों ने निराशा के दौर में हमारी हौसला अफजाई की, हमें रास्ता दिखाया। हमने हर आंदोलन में गांधी विचार पर संवाद के रास्ते हमेशा खोले रखे। कई बार दो तरफा संवाद से भी मिला। संवाद के जरिए हमने अपने तथ्यों की सच्चाई से नीति निर्माताओं को प्रभावित किया, आम जन को सही रास्ते पर लाने के लिए सही तथ्यों के जरिए संवाद कायम कर सफलता प्राप्त की। और मुझे यह कहते हुए बड़ा अभिमान महसूस होता है कि हमारे देश में भी हमारी सरकारों ने जब हमने तथ्यात्मक आधार पर अपनी बात को, अपने संवाद को रखा, तो नीति निर्माताओं ने उसको स्वीकार किया, उसमें सुधार किया। गांधी जी की शुद्धि पर अधिक, साधनों की शुद्धि पर अधिक जोर देते थे। उन्होंने अनेक स्थानों पर कहा भी था कि लक्ष्य के साथ उसे प्राप्त करने के साधन भी सही होने चाहिए। वे स्वतंत्रता के लिए भी असत्य और हिंसा का प्रयोग निश्चित मानते थे। उन्होंने कई बार यह भी कहा कि मैं भारत की आज़ादी के लिए सब कुछ त्यागने को तैयार हूँ सिवाय सत्य और अहिंसा के। अंत में मैं पुनः आयोजकों का, डॉक्टर योगी जी का इस गरिमामय अवसर पर बातचीत करने का जो उन्होंने मुझे अवसर दिया, दान किया, उसके लिए मैं धन्यवाद ज्ञापित करता हूँ। मैंने हिंदी में कहा, शायद कुछ लोगों को ठीक से मेरी बात समझ में नहीं आई, सबके लिए धन्यवाद और आभार व्यक्त कर सकता।
Thank you very much, Sri Chandi Prasad Bhattji, for your immense knowledge and taking time of your busy schedule. Thank you, sir. Now that we have come to the end of today's program, we will have vote of thanks by Miss Shisti Harinarayan.
Namaskar. On behalf of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, it gives me great pleasure in rendering this afternoon's vote of thanks on the 4th day of Gandhian perspectives and the 5 facets of Indian culture, with today's topic being dialogue. We would like to express deep gratitude to our guest speakers, who are Sri Mohit Gupta, Dr. Jasbir Chawla, Professor Joseph Prabhu, Mr. Chandi Prasad Bhatt, Director Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Ms. Cheryl Banwariwal, Mr. Piyush Khandalwal, most importantly to you, our online viewers and guests. Thank you for showing your contribution in watching today's program. Please continue to watch social media pages of SVCC for what's happening next. Namaskar.